Hi everyone! So this is our video on counterarguments and our introduction to counterarguments. We will be talking about counterarguments and writing about them more in class, but right now we're going to go over a general overview and just remembering that this is a cumulative presentation. We're adding on to what we've learned previously about argumentative essays. So that way our ultimate objective of constructing a full-on argumentative essay with introduction, body paragraphs, counterarguments, we're bringing that into fruition. So here we go. So what is a counterargument? Well, a counterargument is an argument or set of reasons put forward to oppose an idea brought up from another argument. So for this class, a counterargument can be easily defined as an argument opposed to your thesis, to your main claim. So previously we've gone over how to construct our main claim, our main argument, our thesis. These are all synonyms. A counterargument is going to be that person who says, I do not agree with you, and this is why I don't agree with you. And your job as an effective writer is to be able to anticipate what somebody might disagree with you about and be able to effectively refute or rebuttal against that counterargument and still defend your claim. So we'll go over how to do that momentarily in this presentation. But first, let's go over an example of a counterargument. So let's say that your argument is that the legal voting age should be lowered to 16. Well, someone who does not agree with you might be like, hey, I don't think 16-year-olds are capable of voting because they're still children and they don't comprehend what they're voting for. Now, your job as the writer, as the defender of your argument, it is your job to defend your argument and prove them wrong. So you, for example, might say, well, a study comparing the qualities associated with voting among citizens 18 and older and citizens below 18 found no significant differences between 16-year-olds and those above age 18. So in this example, you are providing a direct fact, direct tangible logic, logos evidence that this counterargument that some people might believe is actually not valid. Which brings us to our next point. Why use a counterargument, right? Isn't it just easier to defend my argument, don't even bring up other sides, like maybe if we just ignore it, people won't even think about it. Well, it's important to include counterarguments in your essays because they make your argument stronger. Essentially what you are doing is you are sealing the holes that people might poke in your argument. You're anticipating that someone might say X or Y or Z, and you are demonstrating your effectiveness as a trustworthy, credible writer in being able to say, hey, I already thought of that, and here's why my argument is still correct. So including a counterargument demonstrates that you can consider both sides of a debate while still effectively maintaining your stance. You might have witnessed a situation where someone is debating and it's very, very one-sided. They're just talking about themselves. They're just talking about what they believe. They're not bringing up any points that would go against what they're saying. And as a listener, you might be skeptical. You might be thinking, well, all you're saying is all these good things, but there are other bad things that you might want to consider. An effective writer considers those considerations and includes a counterargument in their essay. So, how can I rebuttal a counterargument, right? So we're not just saying that some people disagree with me and then moving on. We have to still prove why we're right despite the disagreements that might occur. So one way to do this is to try and point out any logical fallacies the counterargument may have. And we'll go over these logical fallacies in the next slide. But essentially, you're bringing attention to a point or to points that the other side might not be considering. So if we go back to our example here, and the counterargument is that this person believes 16-year-olds are still children and do not understand what they're voting for, well, the rebuttal is bringing up the point that there are studies that have been done that disprove this assumption. And also, while we are rebuttaling, make sure we're using our transitional phrases to denote your argument versus theirs. So saying, although some people may believe, or however, despite the fact that, really utilizing those transitional phrases to separate the two arguments so the reader doesn't get confused as to, well, why is this person suddenly bringing up the fact that people disagree with them, right? You want to be as clear and concise as possible. So going back to logical fallacies, these are the easiest counterarguments to rebuttal against because, as the title says, they are fallacies. They call them logical fallacies because on the surface, they seem okay, but an effective reader and writer knows that these fallacies do not have a strong base. They're not backed by facts. Usually there are a lot of emotions, a lot of opinions, very little facts that back these fallacies up. So the first fallacy to be wary of is straw man, which is an oversimplification of the opponent's viewpoint made in order to attack it easily. So if you offered so many justifications as to why the legal age of voting should be lowered to 16, and someone just said, okay, so essentially you're saying that 16-year-olds can vote because they know how to drive a car, right? Something just completely simplified, might not even be related to what your actual argument was. That is called a straw man. Next is a slippery slope. So assuming that if we allow A to happen, then Z will happen too. You might hear this a lot from adults who kind of just think of the worst possible scenario. But what this would look like is if someone said, well, if we allow 16-year-olds to vote, then we should just allow 13-year-olds to vote too. And we should allow 16-year-olds to drink while they're at it. And they just keep layering these inconceivable assumptions that you made no mention of, but they are trying to find these holes in your argument that do not exist. So slippery slope is an easy fallacy to disprove because you would say, well, Z is not going to happen because, and then go from there. Ad hominem is an attack on a person's character or personality traits, not their argument. This is more of a fallacy you will hear in debates where a common one is, oh, she's a girl, so she doesn't know what she's talking about, right? That has nothing to do with the person's argument. That only has something to do with their gender, and we're not even talking about gender. That is an ad hominem, very easy to point out. You just say, you are not talking about my argument. You're talking about something about me, has nothing to do with the argument. And lastly, we have bandwagon. So you might be familiar with the term bandwagoning when people kind of jump on to the most popular sports team or the most popular band or the most popular TikTok trend. Same thing with making or someone using a counter argument against you, right? They're appealing to the popularity of something as a justification for its validity. So you might be thinking, where should my counter argument go? Well, there are two outline choices for your argumentative essay. In the first choice, you have your introduction in the front, followed by your supporting points. You have as many as you need. In this class, we're really focusing on at least 2 supporting points. And then finally, your but after your supporting points, it would be your counter argument, followed by your rebuttal, and then at the end, your conclusion. So in this outline, what you're doing is you're setting your argument up, you're defending yourself, and then towards the end, you are bringing in those considerations, saying, although I think this, some people may think this, give your rebuttal, and then you conclude. This way, when the reader is reading your argument, you're pretty much ending on the fact that, hey, I'm thinking about what other people might think. No, I'm thinking about that, and I've thought with my rebuttal, and I'm ready. Excuse me. The second type of outline is more for if your argument as a whole is contingent on rebuttaling against a specific counterargument. So that means your rebuttal would be your thesis statement. So in this sense, if your main concern was that people do not believe the voting age should be lowered because 16-year-olds are incapable of comprehending civic duties, that would all be in your intro, and then your rebuttal would be your main claim. So you would say, however, 16-year-olds should be given the right to vote because there's your thesis statement, followed by your supporting points, wrapping up with your conclusion. Essentially, it is your choice as the writer to pick the outline that best makes sense with your argument. All right, guys, so the last thing to do is to watch this video, how to write a counter argument. Watch this before we meet for class and write down any important notes or questions that you may have. We're going to go over this material again, so don't worry. Make sure if you have questions, you write them down so you don't forget. There's a graphic organizer on this page, so when you're watching the video, following along, take some notes, write some important key facts, and keep this with you when we come to class tomorrow. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys.